Welcome to 360 Money Matters, where financial planners Billy and Andrew talk all things financial planning. This podcast aims to increase your knowledge and confidence with all things money. Each week, they will cover topics like wealth creation strategies, investment principles, creating passive income, paying off your debt faster, and much, much more, so you can live a life on your terms without limits.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the 360 Money Matters podcast. I am Billy and joined by my co-host,
Andrew. Back again, Bills. Another podcast.
Another podcast, another day, another podcast. Andrew, absolutely. Juicy one today for our listeners, mate. How have you been anyway?
I'm good. I've been well. Everything's traveling well. I am excited about this podcast, though. I don't think I've been as excited for another podcast.
You know what? Look, reading over the stuff that we're going to talk about, I was getting excited as well too. And I must say that this one, there's a lot of meat on the bone and the outcome. Actually, I'm just going to come and say it. We're talking about a client scenario today, real life client scenario of somebody that we've spoken to recently. Obviously, we're going to keep everything confidential. So we're just going to go high level summary with the scenario, but the outcome and the benefit to this strategy is really exciting. And yeah, can't wait to get into it. Absolutely.
Yeah, this is definitely a juicy one. This is definitely something that, whole heap of value for the client, whole heap of value for this particular scenario. When these scenarios are becoming, especially when it comes to some of the changes in legislation, some of the changes in rules, in particular the work test, it really just means that this is even more valuable and this is even more accessible to more and more people at the moment than what it was previously. So yeah, something that we're excited about. So I figured that it'd be good to jump on a podcast and share that knowledge around so that we're not just delivering it to one client or to the number of clients in our practice, but sharing that love around.
And good throwback to a couple of weeks ago, we did a podcast on the superannuation changes that are coming into effect on the 1st of July of 2022.
Oh, an even better segue is we're talking about end of financial year and tax and all of that stuff. So yeah.
So if you don't completely follow what we're talking about with the superannuation changes, good opportunity to go back and have a listen to that. So I think it's 3 or 4 episodes ago that we did that. But yeah, like you said, the changes that are coming up really create a much greater opportunity for people in this space. We're going to demonstrate what that looks like today and show you how complex, I was going to say easy, but show you how complex and complicated it is, and really demonstrate the value of advice and the outcome that we're going to have for this particular client. Andrew, without further ado, let's get straight into it. And yeah, what are we looking at?
We've built this one up, so we've got to make sure that the value is driven home here.
I'm pretty confident. We're safe with this one.
Look, in this particular scenario, client has just turned 65 years old. They're still working, and he has a superannuation balance of $250,000 approximately. Now, it's very unlikely that someone has, exactly bang on the dollar, 250,000. He's also earning an income. So he's working, he's employed, he's earning an income of $100,000 a year. And in addition to that, he's got a couple of investment properties where he's also deriving an income from as well.
Just to clarify, sorry, that's $100,000 and he's getting paid super on top of that?
Yep. So superannuation's on top of that $100,000 as well. So what's transpired in this particular scenario is, we're managing some investment planning and some retirement planning for this particular client. And in this particular year, there's some pretty hefty tax savings that we can enact in this situation. And there's some fairly significant tax incentives. So first and foremost, and sort of reason that it's critical in this year, or that, this opportunity has come available in this financial year, is he's turned 65 years old. Billy, what does that mean when he's turned 65 years old?
Oh, yeah. Unrestricted access to his superannuation regardless of his work status. So that's really the crux of, I guess, the first part of it, because, we've spoken about taking money out and putting back into superannuation. This particular client is in that position where both of those things are available, but essentially 65, met a condition of release, you can take your superannuation out without any restrictions. Pretty simple.
Yeah.
So we're going to lean into that, and that's going to form the first part of the strategy.
Yeah. So first part of the strategy is second superannuation law that we're also utilizing in this strategy is the unused concessional contribution portion of superannuation contributions that are also available. So if you throw back to that earlier episode that Billy was alluding to, you have the ability to look back and essentially use the unused concessional contributions towards superannuation.
That was a bit of a mouthful.
Sally sells seashells by the seashore.
So let me just get this straight and get it clear so everyone knows we're on the same page. So essentially what we're doing is client 65, we're looking at the opportunity to be able to pull money out of superannuation. And then you were looking at the contribution rules and any unused caps that this client has got to attempt to get money back into super.
Correct. So because he's got a portion of unused concessional contributions, so I'm making that distinction because there's two elements to this strategy, but a concessional contribution is a pre-tax or a tax-deductible contribution towards super. We've used the unused concessional contribution amount, and we've determined that approximately $60,000 is what he can do as a concessional contribution towards super. So quite simply, we're withdrawing $60,000 out from his $250,000 superannuation balance. Now, we're doing that because he's 65 and he can withdraw as much of his superannuation as he wants. And then what we're doing is that $60,000 that we've drawn out, paid no tax on the withdrawal, we're recontributing it back to superannuation as a concessional or pre-tax contribution towards super.
And the benefit of that is it reduces his assessable income.
Exactly right.
So essentially you're taking advantage of a tax arbitrage opportunity where you're paying 15% tax on contribution of the money that's going back in, but you're reducing his assessable income from, what are we going from $100,000 down to 40?
Correct. So in essence, by doing exactly what we've just done, now if he didn't do this, so let's look at by not enacting this strategy, he works, he's earning 100 grand a year as an income, he would pay approximately $19,500 in income tax.
On his $100,000?
On his $100,000 salary.
So on his $110,000 income, that's inclusive of super, he'll be paying tax of $23,700. If we reduce his assessable income to $40,000, that's by making a $60,000 concessional contribution into super, that $23,000 tax liability goes down to $3,462. So all of a sudden there's about a $20,000 saving just by concessionally contributing the $60,000 into super. However, we are paying 15% in tax on entry on the $60,000, which is $9,000. So total tax that this client will pay under the proposed scenario is about $12,500 tax, versus if he just paid it on his $100,000 income, it'd be about $23,500.
Yep.
So right off the bat, we're talking about a $10,000 saving.
Yep, exactly right. So just to make sure that everyone's got that, assessable income reduces, and as a result, there's a tax saving with the fact that his assessable income is reducing. However, the concessional contribution that goes towards super, that's taxed at 15%. So there's also a tax that's paid in that. However, the difference between his assessable income reducing and the tax that he's paying on his contribution towards super is $10,000 in one financial year. So in essence, we've robbed the tax man legally of $10,000 by purely just drawing the $60,000 out from superannuation and recontributing it as a concessional contribution towards super.
Yeah, and that's really important to point out. The cash flow is exactly the same for the client. It's not costing them anything. A little bit of time out of the market. We obviously need to point that out. But yeah, it's not costing the client anything in order to get that advantage.
Yeah, exactly. And this was actually the response from the client was, this can't be legal. Like there is no way that this is legal. Like we're doing something that is illegal here or something of the sort. But this is a 100% legal tax strategy, and it's something that is definitely going to reduce their assessable income. And sometimes when something sounds too good to be true, it's not.
Definitely not illegal, and we would not be talking on a podcast that we're broadcasting publicly if it was, I can assure you. Andrew, I kind of feel like the guy on TV that's selling the steak knives, and I'm about to say, but wait, there's more, because Surely we weren't getting that excited at the start of the podcast for a $10,000 saving. And don't get me wrong, $10,000 in somebody's pocket rather than the ATO is a very, very, very good outcome. But surely we weren't just getting excited about a $10,000 outcome. I'm going to say it, but wait, there's more. Let's throw in the steak knives, Andrew. What are we talking about?
All right. So I can't believe that we're saying that, because $10,000 is definitely nothing to be sneezed at. And I'd still be getting excited, but maybe not as excited.
But in comparison to what the next value bomb that we're about to drop,
exactly.
There we go.
So the next part of this strategy is, okay, we've enacted that. We've reduced his assessable income. And in essence, the tax that he's paying in the next financial year is going to be, $10,000 less than what it otherwise would have been. The next part of the strategy is after we've enacted that. So after this has been completed and throughout the financial year, what we're also doing is withdrawing the full $250,000 of superannuation, right? So we've drawn $60,000 out, we've recontributed it back in. We're now withdrawing that full $250,000 superannuation balance, and we're then recontributing that $250,000 as an after-tax contribution. So we're using our non-concessional, and for this client scenario, what we're doing is using the bring forward rule to put the full $250,000 in as an after-tax contribution. And Bills, what's that doing?
Just to be clear, Andrew, sorry, before we drop that value bomb, that 250 recontribution strategy, are you doing it this financial year or next financial year?
We're doing that in the same financial year that we're also doing the concessional contribution in. So we're doing that this financial year.
Yep. So for those people that had listened to our recontribution strategy, essentially the reason why we're taking that 250 out and then putting it back in again is to avoid the 17%, we'll call it a death tax, the 17% death tax that gets charged on superannuation monies that were concessionally contributed in the first place into super. So by taking it out, we're changing the tax status of the money and putting it back in. So essentially we're washing all of that 250, changing it to a tax status where regardless of the beneficiary, they're not going to get any tax payable on that money eventually when they receive it as a beneficiary. That number, $42,500 saving for the beneficiaries of death tax that would not be payable by doing this strategy.
Yeah, exactly. So in this scenario, client has 2 adult sons. Both of those sons are over the age of 18, not dependents. And so as a result, if this client was to pass away, touch wood, the benefit that would be paid to those beneficiaries would be taxed at 17%. 17% of the $250,000 is $42,500 tax that would otherwise have been paid by the beneficiaries. By drawing the money out and then recontributing the money back in, we've changed the tax status from taxable proceeds in superannuation to tax-free proceeds in superannuation. And as a result, we're then saving any proceeds that will be paid to the beneficiaries. And as at today's dollars, that's $42,500. But if you consider that, client's still young, you consider life expectancy and the growth of that superannuation over the course of the next 20 years, hopefully even longer. But we're now talking about $42,500 as at today, but the tax status will remain with those funds in perpetuity
as the balance grows.
Exactly right. So what we're talking about, $42,500 to beneficiaries today, may be substantially more at a future point in time if that balance, as expected, will continue to grow.
Now that's something to get excited about, Andrew. So essentially $10,000 tax saving immediately and at least $42,500 of avoiding death tax somewhere down the track for the beneficiaries.
Exactly. And zero impact to cash flow. So normally, and Billy's got a really great saying that normally when you're talking about financial planning, you need to feel the pain. So if you're going to get a tax deduction, if you're going to put money towards super, if you're going to do something, you need to feel a cash flow pain, or you need to feel something. There's always a flip side to, whatever it is that you're enacting. But in this scenario, it's all benefit. Like your cash flow is not impacted. You're not actually having to put money aside or do anything with it. All that you're doing is pulling money out, putting money back in, still having the same money in your bank account, but producing not only your own personal income tax, but also the tax that's then paid to beneficiaries as well.
Yeah.
Massive.
It's huge. And We spoke about a range of different things, and it is complex. It's getting even more complex at the start of the financial year, but it's us in terms of our trade, in terms of our craft, understanding the environment, recognizing the client scenario that will fit that, and saying, yep, there's an opportunity here. Going away, crunching some numbers, putting pen to paper, and this result is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, we're talking $52,500 in tangible benefit with no real change for the client whatsoever. A little bit of timing. Obviously, we need to take advantage of that. A little bit of time out of the market, but we can manage that. That's not a big consideration. But this is a really fantastic result. And I'm sure the client was, absolutely wrapped with it.
Yeah. And I dare say, I mean, it highlights what we always try to go back to is, most people think financial advice, you're talking about investments and that's it. You give someone money, they invest it, and that's all a financial advisor does. But it really highlights the strategy is so important, that it's not just about, yes, naturally for this client, there's a whole bunch of investment advice and investment considerations that sits outside of all of this, but making sure that the strategy is right, making sure that that fits to each client scenario and that you're taking advantage of, whatever opportunities are available is just as, if not more powerful.
Yeah, I'm just looking at these numbers in front of us, Andrew, and I'm still just stoked in terms of the outcome and just shaking
Well, in
my
a
head
couple of
going,
years,
"This
you
is
can do the same
fantastic."
thing, Billy.
Mate, by the time I get there, the laws would have changed 100 times between now and then, mate. I'm a spring chicken. What are you talking about?
So, yeah, I hope that scenario and what we've done, which is, one strategy in a whole heap of different things that we're talking to our clients and doing with our clients over a period of time, really shed some light on some opportunities that are available and the power of receiving financial advice.
Yeah. Well said. Well summarized, Andrew. Once again, really pleased with this outcome. The other thing too, I mean, in this instance, client 65, so we're doing it right on the button. But in the event where a client's in a similar situation where they're continuing to work in other years after they're 65, that's also an opportunity to keep doing this as well too, in some way, shape or form. So the opportunity essentially is continuing to be open to us up until realistically 75 years of age.
Yeah. I mean, from 75 or up until 75, you can take advantage of the washing of funds from taxable to tax-free. So, the tax benefit associated with beneficiaries. And you can obviously make concessional contributions, but there's not a real benefit unless a client is working, unless there's income to offset. So if there's income to offset, then you can also take advantage of reducing the assessable income with concessional contributions until the point in time where there's no income to offset. And at that point in time, you're not paying tax anyway. So
Music to our ears.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So yeah, definitely a few scenarios that this works in. And even, when we're talking about non-concessional contributions, now that you can utilize that all the way up until age 75, you consider someone with $1 million in superannuation and having the ability to wash that money a few times until they turn 75, all of a sudden the tax savings and the tax benefit associated with it just exponentially gets even better.
Yeah, absolutely, Andrew. Well said, well summarized. Thank you for today's podcast. Got a whole heap out of it. Really excited about the opportunity for this client and also other clients that are in a similar position. So, Andrew, thanks for your time today. Yeah, really appreciate it.
Bills, thanks again for another great podcast. To the listeners, really appreciate you tuning in on this one. Details are in the show notes if you want to reach out, if you want to see if something like this is available and can be of benefit to you. Please feel free to reach out to the both of us, and we look forward to meeting you on the next podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions on what we talked about or would like to have a chat about your money journey, visit us at 360fs.com.au.
Just a reminder to our listeners that the information contained in this podcast is general in nature and it is not intended as personal recommendations for the audience. Please consider whether the information suits your circumstances before acting on it. This information is provided by Billy Amaritis and Andrew Nicolaou of 360 Financial Strategists Proprietary Limited, authorised representatives and credit representatives of AMP Financial Planning.